Hello, and welcome back to the Tavern. In this episode of Gatekeepers, the importance of setting, part 2. If you haven't already done so, please consider hitting that subscribe button to this channel and the channels linked in the video description below. If you enjoyed tonight's content, make sure to hit that like button because it really helps us know that we are producing content that you want to see. If you don't like tonight's content, that's just fine. You can hit that dislike button. That's what it's there for. We still get good feedback either way. If you haven't done so, you can join our Discord, where you can pose questions like those featured tonight, and, maybe even get immediate responses from some of the game masters that are in the Discord. Link in the video description. Without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? Hello, my name's Jaide, and this is my Tabletop Tavern. Things are a little different here. Getting my tech reset, and I've finally got a second monitor, so I can actually have things spread out a little more, and I can actually see more, and maybe even see the comments. Hey, Shadow and Sons in the comments, and Shadow and Sons also on stage. Hello, sir.
Howdy, folks.
We've also got Mac Thompson in the comment section. Awesome. Welcome, sir. Six Nation. Yeah, and then hey, L's here too. How about that? Yeah, I was just having some tech issues. Also joining us tonight is MarHawkman. Welcome.
Good evening.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just tech problems. I couldn't get my camera to work. I couldn't get my microphone to work. I couldn't get my headset to work. I was just having a really hard time. So I appreciate you guys for hanging out and being here. And hey, Full Metal, welcome to the show. And even Bo's here. Welcome. So
what's up, Bo?
We left off last week with this topic of setting and how important setting is to the game that you're playing, as well as how important it is for your players to kind of be on board with what the setting has to offer. And part of that is the buy-in. That's kind of where I want to start tonight, if we don't mind, is the buy-in for players has to be there. So, yeah, get down to my questions here. Again, things have changed. Did that question? Sorry, my apologies. I thought I was ready today, but apparently, life decides to kick it into overdrive, and I just got to catch up. So
life finds a way to make you question what you're doing.
Yeah. Let's see here. We left off with, there it is, immersion and buy-in. Okay. So, Shadow, I'm going to start with you on this one. When you sit down with your players, your prospective players, for a game, and it's set in, pick any setting, what is the minimum that you ask of your players to read or research about the setting you're getting ready to play?
Ooh. Well, I'm going to use my current campaign, which just started last Sunday. We've had a couple of sort of session zeros before that, but because it's a nautical campaign, high seas adventure, that sort of thing, right off the bat, I just tell them, pick your favorite high seas adventure movie or book or story, because I'm going to use every trope I can borrow from it. So if you're not into that, if you're hydrophobic or something like that, probably not the thing for you. But if you're into pirates, that sort of thing, then go out and watch whatever you want to get you in the mood. Because regardless of what I do, it's their imagination that's going to really guide their experience. I can describe all kinds of stuff, but if they have no idea what I'm talking about, then at the very least they can go from their own references. If they're big fans of Treasure Island, well, then they're going to picture stuff and imagery from that. Maybe it was a particular version of the movie or the book or Waterworld or Pirates of Dark Water or Voyage of the Dawn Treader, even the Earthsea trilogy, things like that. They're gonna pull and bring from their own experiences. I'm gonna describe things the best of my ability, but chances are they're only gonna record. They're only gonna have their own experiences to color my descriptions. So pick your poison
Wait,
and,
I'm
and,
muted
and apply
apparently.
it.
L's being a little snarky here with Shadow requires everyone to read the full works of Howard and Burroughs.
You know what? That's extra credit. You want to go there? Bonus points, I guess, because they are two of the masters. Without Burroughs, we wouldn't have had Howard, and so on. To modern.
So some of their stuff is sci-fi, because if I remember, isn't Burroughs the guy who wrote a series of stories about life on Mars?
Yeah, John Carter, Warlord of Mars. But he also wrote Tarzan, Journey to the Center of the Earth, a lot of Westerns, Carson of Venus. Take your pick.
I might be thinking of a different author, but one of the authors I remember having read 23 years ago now, it was very much like a slice of life thing. It wasn't John Carter. It was random people trying to make sense of life on Mars and doing weird things like walking into a city possessed by Martian ghosts, but not having the ghosts attack them. No, the ghosts are just doing their whatever Martian stuff as if they were still alive.
No idea what you're talking about. And I could be wrong. He did write something to the Center of the Earth, including Tarzan was one of the books. But
okay. Well, what about you, Mar? What do you like? How much buy-in do you ask of your players when you get ready to run, let's say, one of your favorite settings?
I mean, pay attention to what I tell you about the setting at least, and don't try to sabotage it. Yes, I get that maybe possibly you like other settings more, but if how are you going to know whether you like this setting if you haven't, actually tried it? You know,
hmm for me, as far as like the buy-in for my players on setting, and I know we're kind of getting into the weeds of it like immediately out of the gate on this one, but for me, I think it depends on the setting. Like I wanted to play, and I knew nothing of Wheel of Time. Let me start there. I knew nothing of Wheel of Time before sitting down to play a game that was apparently based in Wheel of Time. So I had no idea that men could not use magic. I had no idea of that whatsoever, or why. So when I asked, okay, do we have a spellcaster in the group? Like, well, we don't. I'm like, okay, I'll play a spellcaster. Okay, you got to be a woman, and you got to do all these things, and you got to be a part of this group. And I'm like, whoa, wait, what? Why? That seems so restrictive, and I don't understand why. And it's again because I hadn't read, the Wheel of Time.
I haven't read the
So
Wheel of Time either. Most of what I know about it is from watching Disparew's YouTube video series about how the TV show adaptation is terrible. Because apparently he actually read all of the books as a teenager and greatly loved them. And then when he watched the TV show, he's like, "What is this garbage?"
that's beside the point. My point here is, if you're going to run a setting that is based on someone else's IP or that was written because of an IP, the players should have at least a working knowledge of the setting before the game starts. For example, Stormlight Archive is coming out with an RPG setting. I can actually talk about this now. Finally, um, I was one of the beta testers back in October, and there are certain elements I can't talk about, obviously, but the buy-in for some of the adventures is staggering for the players. Out of the group of players I had two of them that had completely read all of the works of Sanderson, all of them. And then I had one player who was just starting his journey in the Stormlight Archives, and then I had another player who hadn't gotten past chapter 1 or 2 in the first book of Stormlight Archive. So me, it was a balancing act, or more of a three-ring circus of trying to figure out, what do I say? How do I say it? What do I say that doesn't give away spoilers, or different things within the game world that's part of the setting. Some of these adventures take place, into the third or even after the third book. So I was trying to figure out, how do I say it without saying it, so that my player can, the players who haven't read that far can actually read that far and be surprised by it still, without me ruining it for them. So I was really shocked by the amount of buy-in that players had to have for some of these adventures. And it got me thinking, okay, so what is the standard buy-in for players? Like, how much do they actually have to know? And my answer to that is, players should have a working knowledge, and game masters should also know about where the player's knowledge goes to in the games, or at least in the setting. So the game master's like, okay, we haven't got there yet. Got it. I'll keep my game, pre this time period, so that we can, run, at least have fun in this world, in this setting, and not run into things that you haven't even run across yet. Let me know when you get there, and we can advance the timeline. I mean, and that is one way to play. But if the books or setting has been out for 10, 20, 30 years, and your players still don't know anything about it, teach them as you go, is my advice on that. So you got some comments going. Okay, Tarzan. Okay. I'm not sure what that's in reference to. Probably an earlier comment I missed. Why can you not play John Carter Mars like Dark Sun? That's a question for you, I guess, Mar.
No, that's probably me, because I just reviewed Dark Sun. Because I hated Dark Sun, and it's a poor bastardization of John Carter, if that's what it was attempting. It's just all about misery.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's like, that can't be for me. I don't even know what Dark Sun is.
I
do agree with this. Players can force a higher buy-in than the GM when lore exists. Yeah, I
like
agree.
What Matt says, the last comment. Sometimes it's more fun to explore and learn the world anew. Absolutely. If you don't go in with any preconceived notions, you can, more or less kind of make it your own in a way. At least up here, you can view things and see things that's easiest for you, and that's similar to or comparable to things you're already familiar with.
Yeah. So getting back into immersion, and let's say your players have bought in to the setting, whatever the cost is, however steep that might be for your setting you're running. Huh?
I said $50.
Oh, okay. And then Six Nations says, case in point, Bruce's game. I went in totally blind, never played 3.0, and knew of his world. Forsyth, most part. My role playing may suck, but I'm having gobs of fun. Awesome. Hey, it's great. You can jump right in and have a lot of fun with it.
Six awesome Nations, are you in a Saturday playtest? Because I popped in the other weekend, and I saw a bunch of new faces.
Okay. So, Six Nations responds to you. How can the setting influence character development and player roleplay choices throughout the campaign now that your players have bought into the setting, so to say? and actually know elements and lore and places that exist within the setting. So I'm going to start with Mara on this one. In your campaigns, if your players have bought into the setting, what elements of the setting influence character development and the player's role playing choices during the campaign?
Well, this is one of those things where character backstories are crucial to grounding characters to the world. Because, if you're in your character's hometown, you're going to treat things a little bit differently as a role player than if it's some random town you've never heard of before. And uh, then you have stuff like, it's like, what has this character done in the past? What situations has this character been in and been, emotionally traumatized by? This stuff like that can be very influential in determining role playing, but also it's like the setting it determines what those things are that have happened, and it's not just random nonsense. It's the way the world works manifesting as your past actions.
Can you provide example for that?
Well, in one of the Hyperborea games I was in, uh, which is one that I played several dozen games in this particular campaign. Uh, I played a group of Eskimo from a specific Eskimo village, not more than one at a time, because the entire reason I had more than one of them is that I had them die several times. One of them actually died the first game I played with them, but whatever. Anyways, though, with that, we had the uh, caveat of the fact that these Eskimo were people that, since they all grew up in the same village, they kind of sort of had this idea of we're not here at random, like because like the second, third, etc. We're actually trying to figure out what had happened to the first one, and so on and so forth.
Were
Because
any of them brothers?
no, they weren't actually like directly related to each other. They're just people from the same village.
Okay.
But that sort of kind of created this like in-universe narrative related to the village and stuff around that.
Okay. Um, so for you, Shadow, having your piracy, or not your piracy, your high seas game. Um, how much of that setting tends to influence your players' decisions, or even their development with their characters? How much of that setting actually comes into play?
You honestly have to probably ask them. Uh,
Okay.
there's very, very little lore so far. Just the bare minimums, other than the pantheons, which was crucial for the clerics. They need to know a little bit about the gods, and even then, I made it as simple as possible because I have a lot of first time or very new players, or players who haven't played in a good long time, and I don't want to overwhelm them with a bunch of lore dumps and exposition and things like that. They're not they're not ready for that, or if they are, they'll ask, and I use that as a gauge. When they want to know more, I tell them more. If they don't, I'm not going to bore them with details that they don't seem to be interested in. And real quick, L, I like to think of it as somewhere in the middle, a happy medium. It's the game's about them. It's not about me and my world. Yes, my world is important. Otherwise, they'd have nothing to stand on and nowhere to go and nothing to explore. But I really want the game stories to be more about what they did, how they felt when they go on. I may talk about those games, places like this or what have you, but I tend to not use names and things like that, to protect the guilty. But when they go off and they tell stories to their friends, then those are the real stories. Those are the ones that they remember. Those are the ones that are really important. And I hope that, when all is said and done, that they will have very fond memories, whether they lived or died. It's about them. It's not about me or the world. So
I'm gonna jump in on this one as well. So, when a new player sits down at my table at my own personal setting, and they create this mental image or this headcanon of what's in the world, they, I will, when they ask questions, I'll be like, okay, yeah, I see where you're going with that, and you know what, I like it. I'm gonna write it in. Or if I'm like, well, you'll find out more in just a moment as I bring things from backstage to center stage for them, as things begin to unfold based on their own actions that they took. Typically, these are either counteractions or consequences to things they have done. Um, and many of the times, it's because they're interrupting or playing with powers they don't fully understand within the world yet. And once they gain understanding of things within the world, then the bigger picture begins to come into center view. Um, and yes, I will change my world for their sake if they make a permanent, lasting change on the world. Um, so if I have given them the basically the six major truths of my world, and they're like, okay, I can build a character from this knowledge, and they're like, hey, I was really hoping that this would be a thing. I will either say yes or no, or I will work with them to compromise on whatever it is they're wanting to add in for their character to the game world, as long as it doesn't conflict with one of the six truths, because the six truths are there to help the players along and get them started and into the game, as well as into the right mental space for the game world that they are entering. So,
Well,
um,
with that point
go ahead.
though, there's the whole thing of like the difference between expanding the world and rewriting it.
Yes, there is a difference.
And that's
I'd
a
really rather not
crucial
rewrite.
a distinction when it comes to adding things to a setting because it one of them will have very, very drastic consequences sometimes because when
Can.
you rewrite a setting, it will if you don't do it right, it'll have a domino effect and suddenly half the setting no longer makes sense.
Again, that's where I think my six truths come in for the players is, as long as they're creating characters that are in line with that knowledge, they shouldn't really build counter to the world. And that's another thing with settings, specifically, is when players decide, hey, I'm going to build and play something that is completely counter to this setting. Um, you know, how do you, as the game master, tell them that their concept doesn't work? Like, do you just straight up tell them no? Shadow, I'm going to start with you on this one. So when a or when a player decides, I want to build a character that I want to play against type. I want to play a drow who is a paladin of a sun god, who wants to banish the whatever. Like, how do
yeah,
you
yeah,
tell them
hell,
no?
hell to the fuck no. Excuse my French. Right off the bat, if you're a really adequate DM, you're gonna go through all of the things like you just mentioned and make sure that they can't possibly exist in your world before players even get there. You're gonna be like, yeah, there are no droughts, so just suck it up. There are no drought. There are no tieflings. There are no furries. Whatever it is you don't want in your world, just they don't exist right off the bat. But you know, uh, don't be afraid to tell them no. I mean, you're going to have to tell them no on a regular basis. It's going to be more no than yes. So one more no, if they can't handle their ideal weird character concept, Like, hey, just tell them, there is a table out there somewhere where you can run that. This just isn't that table, and remind them it's not just the two of you. There's a whole bunch of other people at the table, and trust me, most of them don't want to see that crap either, because when someone brings something like that, it's all about advantage, advantage, advantage on top of advantage. Look in the book and find something that's already there, because that's what everybody else had to do. Nobody came to me and said, "Can I run this thing that never existed before on your planet?" Well, obviously, no. But if it's possible, the character that you create may be able to somehow bring about that change through gameplay. Maybe like there are no guns, and your player wants to be the first person to bring guns to the planet. Well, okay, if you know anything about guns, then you should be able to figure out a way to find the necessary ingredients. Go back to the Star Trek episode with the Gorn and look up the ingredients, and find a way. We could work that out if you want to be the person to bring that about. But you're not going to start out with something that right off the bat is just too much, because that's what I find most of the time. It's about bringing something that's just front loaded with advantages that are, let's be honest, a little unfair to the other players. They've all decided to play the elves and the dwarves and the humans, and you want to bring in something brand new. Well, shouldn't I have, or shouldn't I, offer them all the opportunity to do the same thing as you then? It's like, oh, okay, well, Joe wants to run a tiefling vampire. Anybody else want to run one too? Nah, that's not what I signed up for. And they've already built their characters, work within the book, and I'm just using that example, L. That way the player can at least have a vague idea of the steps that would be necessary to get that done. Because there's, to be honest, there's no way to take the player out of the character. There just isn't. You're always gonna be that character, whether it's 1% or 100%. That character is you in some way. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist because you created it.
So, the six truths. I'm gonna get back to this one here. The six truths I actually picked up from Sly Flourish a few years back. The book Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master is where I picked that up at. And it was such a concept that I'm like, you know what? That would streamline so much for me, getting players all the front loaded with all of the knowledge they need, and the minimal knowledge that they need to be able to jump in and actually play the game with the least amount of effort required to explain how the world was created and why the deities are there and why the player races are there. Without having to go into that level of detail and lore dump on them, it gets them all the information that they need, and I do mean need, not necessarily want, to be able to play a character in that game world. Some game masters go further. Some game masters give you like full manuals of, hey, here's my game world, and here's the 150 pages that exist. From beginning of the world to the where you are now. So I mean, it's like I said, it's something I picked up, and I've decided, you know what, I'm going to run with it because it works. It has worked so far.
Mm. Well, what Shadow
Yeah.
is saying about weird, off the wall characters reminds me of how some of the characters I've created for Star Trek settings are things that are literally out of universe inserts.
Okay. So then, how do you rectify that? Like, how do you, in your example, you say that you were creating things that were completely out of universe, and how is the game master supposed to work with you to allow something that's completely out of universe
Well, for
into the
for
game?
for one example, a character who ended up having the name 7 of 13. A liberated Borg, who most people think is a liberated Borg human. He's actually a
But
Terminator.
you said something else besides Borg. Sorry. Wow.
And on the outside, he looks human because the series of Terminators is from is the ones that have like a human flesh covering on them, and the Borg didn't get rid of that. They just decided to keep it, so he still looks human. It's just that he never actually had a living brain inside him. He and he, but here's the thing though, is that how does this mesh in with Star Trek world? The idea here being that he somehow got displaced by a wormhole jumping between universes because the time dilation technology used by Terminators to time travel has been known to have some very strange glitches at some times and doesn't always work right. So the idea I had was that he attempted to time travel into the past, got dumped into the wrong universe instead. Simple enough. Thing is, no one in the Star Trek universe knows what he is because of the fact that when the Borg were assimilating him, they kind of erased all of his memories because of the fact that he's an artificial life form and they just didn't get it.
But I so that still doesn't really get to the point of, well, I guess it does in a way. Like your game master. I'm assuming you played this. You weren't the game master.
Well, it's a character that I used in a story. It's not really one that I actually use in a team
Oh,
character.
okay.
I was
Okay.
just using it as an example of like forcing the character.
Okay. So it wasn't actually at the table. Okay. Um, so in situations like that, because I've had players go, I want to play a gunslinger. Well, this is a Stone Age game. Like,
Mhm.
we're, the timeline it is backwards, not forward. Well,
Oh,
I want to use lasers in Bronze Age combat. No, the answer is simply un unapologetically no.
yeah, that's one of those
Um,
incredibly extreme examples where I can't think of any way to make it fit unless it
Crash
requires
landed. I'm an alien from another planet. I crash landed with my
literally
laser
like
pistol.
rewriting the story that you're trying to tell for the setting. Because the fact that you would have to wedge that into the story because it's not a plot element that existed previously.
mhm,
Like liberated Borg. There are liberated Borg from literally hundreds of species. So having
mhm,
one that's just like slightly off and weird looking because every liberated Borg is different. Despite all their focus on efficiency, the Borg never make two drones exactly the same.
hmm, okay. So, let's see here. Um, Trying to figure out how to caveat off of that. I know there really isn't a caveat. I just guess we're gonna have to segue. So, speaking, again to immersion and player buy-in. When your players, I guess it might also be genre specific. So let me ask this question: do different genres of settings impact player expectations of gameplay and dynamics? And
Absolutely.
by okay, can you expound or ruminate on that?
Well, for example, a horror campaign or genre is vastly different. And it doesn't even matter what genre it is. Players have to expect that bad things are going to happen more often than not compared to any other setting. That's what makes horror horror. It's horrible. On many different levels, you have to that's just the price of admission. If you're not into it, don't show up. Whereas sci-fi can be very, very positive, very happy, very aspirational, and that's a toughie sometimes to turn into a horror campaign. Not impossible, and actually quite satisfying.
Oh, yeah.
The
Star
the
Trek in
entire
particular
the,
has
the
a
entire uh, first run of Star Trek was very much in my opinion, a horror campaign. It just in space. Everything that happened was horrible. At
Mar,
least
you
it's
were wanting to say?
Oh, well, I mean, like, I was just gonna give a few examples of how Star Trek can be horrible. The crystalline entity, seeing it erase every life, form on several planets before they could find a way to stop it. It went horrible. Hey.
I mean, yeah, that's one example of horror, but or of a horrible thing.
And
But
and and of course, knowing that it would do the same thing to the crew of the entire ship if they screwed up. I
mm,
mean, that's the sort of existential dread that gives you a cold knot in your stomach just thinking about it.
the episode where
okay,
Kirk gets is in that suit the whole time, but he's out of phase and he's about to potentially be lost to the crew. That's a horror. That's a classic kind of horror idea.
okay. Um, so I guess with genre and setting, if yeah, I don't know how to combine. I don't know where I'm going with that thought. So,
Well, I mean, let's go through a
It's
quick
called
example.
getting old.
Like, um, Taking something
long
from a
day.
different setting and adapting it to shove it into Star Trek is relatively easy because of the sheer variety of stuff that we've already seen in Star Trek. However, taking
Sure,
something from Star Trek and trying to shove it into, say, Terminator, that wouldn't go anywhere near as well because, like, displacing a Terminator into Star Trek is relatively easy because Star Trek has several different kinds of androids and cyborgs already. People would be like, "Oh, that's slightly different. Whatever." From an in-universe perspective, it just wouldn't stick out as being fantastically strange. However,
sure.
take the Calamarain from Star Trek and transplant that into Terminator, and the entire logic of it breaks the setting.
I disagree. I mean, we had um, Aliens versus Predator, Terminator versus Predator. Um, it's just one more alien you're plopping in, and you're swapping one out for the other.
Well, I chose the Calamarain as an example because of the fact that it's an ethereal space cloud and not actually a humanoid.
Mhm. The
Yeah.
Mist, ring a bell?
Well, it's an ethereal space cloud that can, like, destroy starships, so, it's a little more I directly, imposing than the Mist, I guess.
Okay,
I
so
can do it.
I'm gonna change directions again because I think we're getting a little off the rails here. Um, so let's talk about uh,
That's
actually let me
900
change directions entirely and go towards player agency. The ability for players to make lasting changes or decisions in the game that affect the game on a grand or even sometimes a small scale. Um, the idea of freedom in choice and method, I think, is one of the greatest things that we as game masters can allow to happen in a game. If your players want to, I don't know, swing from the chandelier, I'm going to let them. But I if the chandelier's not anchored well, I'm going to give it a roll and find out what happens to them. Um, you know, so in your opinion, how much freedom should players have in influencing the setting itself? Like the setting has set rules, obviously, and set limitations of what is and is not possible. But how much freedom do you allow your players to make changes in that setting? Amar, I'm going to start with you.
Well, the simplest way to explain this is to say that, um, players can suggest things. However, it is always up to the GM to accept or reject those suggestions. Players do not control the game in that regard. Now, a player deciding what their character does, okay, sure, that's one thing. But if it's something that's goes beyond what their character's current actions are, then the GM has to decide that. So it's like, well, for example, is in one of the 5e games I was a player in, the character that I was creating was a weird elf variant, or not elf, but variant of a I forget what they're called, Ganassi, a fire Ganassi variant. I started off by asking the GM if it was okay if I played this a character concept before actually finishing making the character, because of the fact that I didn't want to try to force the GM to accept it when the GM didn't want to. And that's like the basic gist of it, though, is that um, you shouldn't try to like force the GM to do things your way just because if the GM really doesn't want to. I guess as one person put it, it's like, as the GM, you always have the right to say no.
Sure.
And as Connell would
Um,
say, is that if people are playing you to or paying you to run the game, they kind of sort of have expectations about what they pay you for. But
um, so, okay, to you then, Shadow, how much freedom do you allow your players in influencing the setting of the world? Like, for example, you've got your high seas game. Like, how much influence do they have on what is possible in that game world or where things are?
As much as they can logically justify. I want
Okay.
it's their world eventually. Without them, I'm relegated to writing modules and trying to sell them online, or not playing, or maybe writing a novel. Otherwise, I've got no players. If they can't do things, if they can't change the world, if they can't carve out their own little kingdom, why are they there? Unless they're the murder hobo type who don't really care about anything other than what they can carry, then okay, fine. That gets old for me real quick. I want them to to carve out a kingdom, if not an empire, and call it their own. That's going to bring them back like you can't even imagine. This is now my world. I've got a kingdom to run. When are we playing again? I got I got things to do now. That's the sweet spot for me. Is you know you want to call it domain play or things like that, whatever. As long as they're doing stuff like that, the world changes in ways I could never predict, and it makes it a better place. I give you an example. One of my worlds, the players haven't been to it in 10 years. Okay, my regular group. But if I run it again ever, everything they did is now part of the world, and I will be describing it as if it was my idea, even though it wasn't. And I'll have so much lore that they created that I can share with the next group of players. And you know, if they ever ask, I would say, "Oh yeah, that was my player so and so that did this back in the day." Otherwise, I'm going to take credit for all of it, and they're going to be able to see that this world is more than just two dimensional.
Okay. As
Hey,
for me,
Mac.
when it comes to the game world itself, because I have my own world, I've made my own world over the course of 2 decades, 2.5 decades. Um, my players and I've played over multiple different ages or time periods in the game, and things that players in the first group did made lasting changes to the world. They reshaped an entire coastline actually in the game world, and I erased what was there. Literally, just erased the old map and remade the coastline based on how they used exceptionally powerful magic to reshape the coastline. They erased an entire town from ever existing. because the town pissed them off that greatly. They're like, okay, you know what? That town doesn't have to exist. As a matter of fact, that entire coastline is not a coastline. It is now a bluff because we are erasing 100 feet back. Everything that exists out in the sea, just gone. We're just going to disintegrate it all. Yeah, they were murder hobos, but the town kind of had it coming too, because the townspeople were not great people. It was a den of thieves. It was a den of cutthroats. And when the town took the people that the player characters cared about, and not just slit their throat, but used them for chumming bait for fish, the PCs went a little irate, and they had every right to. I just wasn't expecting them to reshape the world quite so literally. A lot of magic was expended that day. Actually, no, I think they took a week to reshape the entire coastline with just high magic, and it made lasting changes. So I not only did I erase the map physically in front of them, I'm like, okay, so I erased it. I'm like, here you go. Draw in the new bluff line that is going to be on this, non-existent coast. So they drew it, and I kept it as part of the world. Like that was a permanent change that my players made to the world. But they were high enough power, in magic power and character strength to do so. Characters who are not as dramatically powerful, have the ability to make smaller changes and lasting changes still.
What's up?
Let's see here. And do you do this with published settings? Yes, actually. I will go ahead and say that I mock because Hexbase crawls our world. We hex crawled our world. There was no setting except medieval fantasy. Fair enough. I will say yes if my player, because I've done this with Iron Kingdoms, if my players make a large enough or lasting change, even in a published setting, for my use and my use only of a published setting, those changes are permanent to the timeline. They're indelible. They cannot be reversed once those things are set into motion, because actions have consequences. So if I was to reopen my setting notes for Iron Kingdoms, I would see where characters made specific changes to the world, or they rose to power politically and became became prominent members of the Signarian. Was it Signarian Empire? No, it's the Cord Empire and the Signarian. Can't remember. It's been a while. Been 2 decades. But I would have those notes where we left off. So the next game I start in that setting, I'd be able to say, okay, everything you know of this setting, here are the minor changes I need to make to your frame of knowledge. And I would go from there. Here. World we played was never seen before and will never be seen again. That is truly awesome. And I'm a little saddened that those notes don't exist and are out there for people to read. But, that's how a lot of games go. Hell,
Most games.
yeah, most games go that way, unfortunately. I would love to see more worlds not necessarily be published, but I would love to see people's notes from those games. Read over their adventures and see all the things that happened and read about them. I would love that so much. I would actually get more enjoyment out of that than other media, honestly. I don't think changing the physical landmarks are really player changing the setting. That's just moving dirt or adding races, guns, etc. Actually, I did have players add guns to the game. Wasn't even I've had game characters make repeating ballistas in the game, and those lasted. As a matter of fact, they became quite a military tool for a lot of different nations. Until gunpowder, then the players are like, okay, well, now that we have gunpowder, I'm going to experiment with it. I'm going to make repeating rifles. I'm going to make multi-barreled rifles. I'm going to make cannons that lob Volkswagens across the battlefield. I'm like, okay, well, are you going to make the Volkswagen first, or are you going to I got a little pedantic with them, but they they figured out ways to do things in the game, and I'm like, "You're right, that's a lasting change. I'll note it and, add it to the game world." I don't have a problem with that, especially for my own world.
It's because
Fair
you're a
enough.
good DM, Jade. There's a
Um,
lot of
I
I've
I
seen.
would I would say I'm a mediocre GM.
No, what I mean
I've
is
made a
I've
lot of
literally
mistakes.
seen DMs, um, have things like that happen in a game and then retcon it the next time a new group shows up. Oh, that doesn't exist. That never happened. Like, I was in that campaign. What do you mean it never happened? Yeah, I didn't like it, so I'm doing it over. You're a sack of crap. Not you personally, but that particular individual is like they did all that, and you're just going to erase every single bit of it because it didn't go your way. It was never your way to begin with, unless you're running a purely railroady situation, in which case, um,
I've done that,
yeah,
unfortunately.
That's a big buy-in thing because, you
they
enter
basically just wasted their time.
you enter the game under the understanding that part of the outcome will be randomized. You aren't going to be in control of everything in the game at any point. Even as the GM, you're not actually fully in control of everything that happens in the game. Because when players roll dice, the dice dictate the outcome.
Yep. I will say that as far as adding new races, well, there was a bard in the party, and he was the reason for half everything. Yes, they played that trope to death.
What trope is that?
I hated them. The bard will screw anything trope. The
Oh.
reason for half race everything's is because of the bard in the party. Yeah, yeah,
Sorry.
Yes,
All right,
that.
yep.
it's been a
They
long
mean,
they they overplayed that a lot.
I've heard of people doing some interesting things with bards in the party. I mean, from the GM side, it's like, yes, you have decided to seduce the dark elf, who is the leader of the invading army. Okay, cool. Roll to see if you have your charisma persuasion check succeed. Ah, you failed. That's unfortunate. Her guards drag you down to the dungeon to torture you. Ugh.
Um,
Well,
well, okay, again,
I look at
go ahead.
setting is everything but the rules, unless it's
Mhm.
rules on why magic doesn't work or why it works a certain way. Um, Game mechanics to me are like the least important thing of the entire hobby.
So, I will say that new races, and maybe I'm getting a little too far into the weeds here, but in your example, L, it is possible for my players if they achieve, because again, my games reach apotheosis. They reach the demigod or even godhood state. Often actually, that's where some of my games tend to go. It's actually some of my games even start that high of power. Um, and because of that, players can achieve such power, such influence over a world that they are able to introduce new races. They're able to introduce new concepts, new magic, new things into the game world, and I will make note of them. I will also make note of the time branch of where it's happening at, and to see if how it would deviate further. Um, so if it deviates too far in one direction, I'm like, okay, so that is a different reality, a different branch of reality that I don't want to pursue. But when I play with that person, that is a permanent change. Like they change the world. The setting to them is that way. When I go to a different group, it may not be that setting anymore. I might have made an adjacent setting to it. That I'm ignoring that branch and I'm going in a different direction now. Kind of like what I'm doing with the Bronze Age game. I'm resetting my timelines back to the very beginning. That has never been played before. It has never been written before. Nothing of that time period exists in the modern setting world. So the characters are free to do pretty much whatever. And there's enough time difference between that anything that the very first group through the 10th group that went through my modern era world, there's enough time gap there that those things will not have been discovered. Or if they were discovered, they were far gone and ruined, or they had no meaning left to them. Dragonlance, Dark Sun, our settings, Shadow Dark game. The notes thrown away, buried, pissed on. Others can play Dark Sun settings from the box set. Yeah. All right. So continuing with the idea of agency, do you allow your setting? Well, I guess we've kind of already answered this question. Allowing the setting to evolve dramatically or dynamically based on player actions, but still remains static throughout the campaign. Yeah, we kind of touched on that, didn't we?
Yeah.
I'll ignore that one.
Yeah, I mean, like having like this, that, and the other thing happen. I mean, the
Mhm.
world players are playing in changes as a result of their actions. So that has the effect of making it shift away from where you started it. But, it's
Okay.
not like they're going to completely change what planet they're on or anything like that unless, there's a game event of an equal scale to have such a
Sure.
change occur.
Okay. Getting back into player choices and things they decided to do to, express their creative freedoms and whatnot. And Shadow, I'm going to start with you on this one. So when you're designing your setting and you've got the high C setting, how do you balance th- between providing enough detail for your players to be able to really get into the setting, but still allowing for your players to have the creativity to make things that fit into the world? Like, how do you balance that?
Honestly, by giving them only the details they ask for. Not only, but as little, they mind you, my group is like a 50-50 mix of really experienced players and kind of not newbies, but haven't been in it for a while. So I'm gonna,
Okay.
give them, not a little bit more than the bare minimums. Nobody cares what the buildings look like, the architectural style, what the trees look like. They want to get into the action and the the actual playing. Not listening. They want to play. They want to be the one talking. I want to be the one listening. I want them to do most of what's going on. Otherwise it's not about them. I want them to tell me what they're doing and use all of that and absorb it so that I can use it later. Get an idea of what they're looking for, what they want, and just not deluge them with information that they don't care about.
Okay. So let's say a player wanted to, and now I'm using your example still of the high seas. I'm assuming a crew of mostly human, right?
No,
No? Okay.
no,
You've got different races?
I've got all of the races, all of the, let's say, 4 races, because everything else is like bad guys.
Mhm.
Okay, Mac, you just keep those questions coming. It's a male and female crew because it's not Earth. I don't use any of that, superstition. You can't have women on board. Hell, at this point, there's actually probably almost 5 or 10% more females than males on the ship, because it's a water world. So any ship that's out there needs everybody. There was an apocalyptic event that devastated the population, so everybody had to step up and start doing more.
Okay.
Therefore, there's uh,
So I guess my question for you then is, do you allow, like, do you have any aquatic races yet?
yes,
Has anyone asked, hey, okay, so you've got aquatic, do you have any avian races?
yes, they just haven't met them.
Okay.
Shit.
So they exist in the setting. If one of your players decided, hey, I know you haven't introduced this race yet. I'd really like to play an avian type character, somebody who can glide on air currents, above the ship. Would you allow them to bring that in?
What I would tell them and I've already actually had to tell one player that there are things like that, but you have to get there to meet them. And once you meet them, if you choose to roll up a brand new character to come on board, not a problem. Because
Okay.
there are lots of other races on the planet, but the planet is so uh, birdfish babies. The distance between islands and continents is so vast that half the world is completely unexplored or unknown because of the apocalypse and the distance. If they get to one of those places, besides it's AD&D, half the characters are going to be dead in a couple of days, so they'll have plenty of opportunities to make up new characters. And um, if they want to make up a new character that's one of the new things that they bump into, not a problem. I expect when I finally run this campaign aground and call it quits, that the crew will be made up of lots of things that they never expected.
Okay. Um, so Mar, same kind of scenario to you. When let's say you're in Star Trek and someone says, "Hey, I'd really like to play, I don't know, an avatar of a sun, from one of Gene Roddenberry's other series, Andromeda." How would you balance that and would you first off allow that? And
Hmm.
if you do, how would you balance it?
I was wondering what you were going to come up with for something that would actually be awkward in
Uh-huh.
a Star Trek setting. Hmm. The
And that is
stellar
definitely an odd one.
avatars from Andromeda. That
Yep.
is actually something that would be genuinely one of the super alien races in Star Trek, because just the sheer power level that those beings have. But it's not necessarily something that would be game breaking, depending on the exact mechanics of how that works.
So
Because, like,
you
for
you would
example, like
work with the
in many
player on that
ways,
then.
in the next generation, Data is just one of those beings who is game breakingly powerful in many ways. It's like he can do mathematical calculations in his head faster than someone can type them into a computer. He can rip apart steel bulkheads. Uh, I mean, stuff like that. But it's about the settings and how the characters get used in this story. But like what you said though, is is something that would be genuinely powerful enough that you would have to handle it very carefully if you bother with it at all. I personally would decide that that's a little over the top and probably a bad idea, but it may, if you really wanted to do it, maybe, but I don't personally consider it to be a good idea. However,
Okay.
that being said, I have actually seriously contemplated playing one of the FGC 47 life forms in a TTRPG. For those
So
of you who don't know, the FGC 47 life forms are energy beings who can take on the appearance of humanoids, but, well, they're energy beings. The humanoid appearance is an illusion.
assuming a game master would allow something like that, how would you propose to balance, pr- you know, well, how would you propose bringing something like that in to an established setting to allow the player to do that? Or should you as the game master? And, I know there's a lot of game masters out there who say, "No, I'm not going to allow it."
I mean,
It's
step
not
one
part of the
is to
setting.
establish limits. I mean, like the example
Okay.
with the FGC 47 life forms is that while it is a energy based life form, individually, the FGC 47 life forms really aren't incredibly powerful. They have all
Okay.
sorts of abilities humans don't, like, they can shift it into energy form and then just walk through walls because they're not made out of solid matter. But people can track them with, sensors. They if one of them is walking around through the walls, you can sense them with a tricorder if you know what energy signature you're looking for. Stuff like that,
Fair
you
enough.
know?
Okay. Um. So, and L does bring up a good point. Maybe I'm conflating setting and world, but when allowing players to have these really cool characters, these things like, hey, yeah, I really want to play a kitsune character in an area where the kitsune just don't exist. Because I've had that. I've had a player do that where they're like, I really want to play a kitsune. I'm like, the kitsune don't fit here. Like, I'm telling you straight out, they're okay, you want to play a kitsune? Fine. Here's how I handle it. Actually, I'm like, you give me a one-page backstory on why there is a kitsune literally tens of thousands away from home. Why is there a kitsune in the middle of this area? If you can explain it to me and create a compelling enough story for me, I will consider allowing it.
Mhm.
Otherwise, the answer is going to be no.
My
Yes,
first thought
Shadow.
is a banishment spell. So someone, got annoyed at the kitsune and used magic to make the kitsune be no longer here.
Elsewhere.
Wouldn't that, because I have the same sort of thing going on with my world, is that it's so far. Um, for example, the dwarves and the elves and the humans, they live, like 1,000 miles apart, with nothing but water in between. Wouldn't you say that, or wouldn't you find that it would be best to say, I'll tell you what, we'll do a one-on-one RPG session, just you and me and your character, and we're going to see if we can get you there without dying.
I mean, that's also a great idea.
Because otherwise,
And
you're what, your first level and you're here. I don't think
right.
so. There's I've had to do this many times, and I'm working with it with my players, because there are elves and dwarves and hobbits and a gnome and even someone from the Orient, and we're talking tens, not tens, a couple of thousand miles for the average. One character's like 10,000 miles away from home. How did you get there without being like seventh level when you met the rest of the group? Because that's
Um,
logically what would happen if they're so far apart. What, they just slept the whole way? They just got on a boat. Wake me when we're there. Okay, you get no
Hmm.
XP. Your first level.
so
Here you go.
the player explained the existence of their character in the area, um, as one of their family members got displaced. Their mother or father got displaced to this region before he was born, and he was born in the region. And he made a compelling enough story for his character's lineage being born in the area that I'm like, okay, I will allow it. However, here's the caveat. This is why this is why your ancestors here,
So it was a
and
hobbit.
this is the reason for them not just being here, but this was their mission, and this is who they serve. And you include this however you need to get it to work. And we worked together to allow it, so I would allow it to happen. And I'm willing to do that for my players. And my players are like, hey, I realize your world doesn't have any, I don't know, um, ooze people. Yeah, you're right. I don't really like ooze people, and it's just not something I would ever consider. Like, but I've got the stats for it. It's actually written in stats, and I think it would be really cool if I could play this. I'm like, okay, first off, I don't like it. Period. Just I really don't, because it doesn't fit within the world setting. If you can convince me in one or more pages, I'll consider it, but I make no promises, and that's typically how I handle it. You know, I'm willing to work with my players to a certain point, but I want to know what the plan is around whatever they're trying to get me to say yes to. I want to know why they want this. Is it because it breaks the game in some mechanical way? If that's the reason, the answer is straight out no, unequivocally no. I'm not going to just
I
let
can't
people.
imagine anybody actually copying to that, saying, "Oh, I just want to screw your game over."
Well, it's not so much. It's not the I want to screw your game over. It's the person who goes, I want to play One Punch Man. I'm sorry, there's a video game about that. Go play the video game. I want to. I want to be I want to have the ability to turn into literally any type of person. Okay, that already exists. They're called changelings. You can take on the appearance of others.
That's actually one of the things the FGC-47 life forms could do is that they could mimic
Point in
objects
case.
that they'd seen.
But so like I said, I'm willing to work with a player up to a point for allowing things into the game or into a setting that typically are not there. I'm willing to work with them. However, I need to know why. I need to know what the plan is. I need to know what is the concept here? Like, why is this even here? And I need to know the whys as the game master. Because if I can't wrap my head around it being in the setting, the answer's got to be no. Like if I can't see the vision, and if it's game breaking, like purposefully game breaking, I will always say no. Play something else because I'm not going to allow you to break the game out of the gate and have everyone else just be backup characters to you to take second fiddle to a character that shouldn't even belong. The answer is going to be no.
This is why I made that comment earlier about defining limitations because
Mhm.
if you have a character who you've decided should be immune to being shot with phasers in a Star Trek setting, that's a game-breakingly broken ability. That
Immune to phasers,
so-
but not necessarily projectiles. The board.
well, yeah, but you'd need to have like something where it's not like they can just like ignore the game mechanics and just do whatever they want in regardless of them. So I mean, uh, the key there is having something to limit what they're capable of and give the rest of the team reasons to do things to to be an actual party and not just like followers watching the main character do stuff.
Sorry, responding to L in the chat. Sorry. All right. Let's see here. So I'm gonna switch gears again. And we're gonna talk about when the setting itself takes center stage instead of the players. Now I know the game is supposed to be about the players. The evening is supposed to always be the players taking center stage, the players' actions having weight and gravity and being able to have those heroic moments or those glory moments. But sometimes the setting itself needs to take center stage for things to happen in the world, and the players need to understand or be able to react to those things. So, for example, Shadow, your world sounds like it's a world of storms, of lots and lots of storms and stormy weather. With that much water, being exposed to that much sunlight, I would imagine there's a lot of evaporation that happens, a lot of precipitation that also follows.
Yeah.
In that, so when that occurs, like, is that something that is central to the game as an element? Do they experience a lot of weather?
There's actually some pretty extreme locales where they get a lot of this kind of weather or this kind of it's a desert, so there is no weather kind of thing. But I still don't want it to take center stage. I want I want the that's what one of the reasons that or one of the things I like about uh, high seas campaigns is that each little island becomes its own world, and then that little place becomes center stage for a little while. Kind of the way I also look at sci-fi setting games. That's when if you recall, we'll use Star Trek again for your benefit, Mar. Every time they went to a new planet in the original series, and maybe even Next Generation. After that, I kind of checked out. But each new world had to take center stage because it was a new world. You know nothing about this place. Let's we're here to explore this new place, just like the islands. It now this place takes center stage for a little while until the players learn it. Once they learn it, it focuses back on them. There is most of the mystery is gone. It's back on them. That's what I always look at our games like other people are watching, even though they're not. If you were going to tell this as a story, as a novel, or at the bar, telling your friends about your game, would it be an interesting tale to tell? Would there be anything about this to retell? Well, let's make that answer always yes. Let's assume people are watching. Let's go for it being about the players and the characters. When we watch most other TV shows, we don't care. Especially like TV shows. Movies may be different because they're working with a bigger budget and whatnot. We don't care about the environment. It's about the back and forth between the characters and what's going on.
But so
my thought.
the setting there would basically give shape to either the narrative or what the players can and cannot interact with. I know that it's also the world, but in ways that, like, the players may not always have the option of teleporting because they've entered a wild magic or null magic zone within the world, but the setting is what allows that to happen. So the setting, I think, will also play a crucial role in what choices the players have available to them.
Absolutely, but I don't want it to overpower what's going on with the characters.
Okay.
Otherwise, I don't need them. I'll just write my own world and then create my own, two-dimensional characters to walk through it. I want these three-dimensional people, and I want them to be three-dimensional. And if the world, I view it as the world, like El was talking about Mars taking center stage in the John Carter novels. It does in the first book. After that, it sort of fades into the background like an original series Star Trek background. Eventually you don't care that the sky is red or orange or whatever, because you're already pulled into what's going on with Kirk and Spock and whatever new aliens they meet. The background is only there for when they beam down. You go, oh, new world. Okay, the skies are purple and the ground is orange. Okay, great. Can we move on and get into the action, the intrigue, the mystery, whatever this one's going to be about, whatever this episode, this game session, it's about them. It's about the characters. We hear, a lot of our fellow compatriots complain about Tolkien's, going on and on about the trees and the flowers and all that crap. When, he didn't know it, but we didn't care. Back then maybe they did, but now we want to hear about, the characters. The no matter how awesome you make the world, it's going to fade after time. with its with its weirdness or its awesomeness or whatever it is, it's gonna fade because it's always going to be there. It's always going to be the same way within reason. But the characters are the things that are changing, and they're changing everything around them.
Hmm. Well, yeah, it was like what you're talking about is like the whole like Alien of the Week thing. Is that Star Trek actually had a rather surprisingly variable utilization of the Alien of the Week.
Sure.
I mean, as I mentioned before, I've been doing the whole lore and uh, setting mechanics of the various Star Trek episodes and going over them. And some of the episodes actually have, if you pay close enough attention, some very, very interesting background details that you won't understand the first time you see the episode, because things will get mentioned that you don't understand the first time you watch it, and then when you rewatch it later, you're like, "Oh, that." And but also it's like the actual like way that each of the aliens a week gets used is slightly different, and some of them are actually ancillary to the actual story. Like, for example, the Antedians. The Antedians were actually a big part of the episode, but they were also at the same time pushed off to the side shortly after the beginning of the episode they were in, because of the fact that what they did, while crucial to the plot, set up someone else to take over the main stage. So that the Antedians literally spent the rest of the episode sleeping or something. Yeah. Odd choice, especially when they spent hours costuming people to look like fish people in a Star
Yeah,
Trek
I
episode.
knew that's one you were talking about. Yeah, because nobody cared. They're fish people. How exciting can fish people be? No offense to all the fish people out there, but you know, it's kind of a it's like the lowest tier of aliens that player characters are going to want to play. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
There's nothing exciting
Well,
or super interesting about them. So yeah, have them go to sleep. And
Well, that's an interesting thing, though, is that fish people are seen so rarely in Star Trek that the simple fact that the Antedians exist is a bit of an anomaly because of just how
well, they had a
few.
poll and nobody cared.
Yep.
Oh,
So
well. But like,
as
so
far as
some of the
the
episodes, the culture and planet and all that stuff of the Alien of the Week is literally the crux of the story. Like the Akamarians, for example. That one, they did a deep dive into history and stuff on the planet Akamar. And uh, the crew of the Enterprise had to learn Akamarian history and how to recognize different cultural shifts within Akamarian society to figure
but
out what was going on.
that's less setting and more world. So for example, when I am having my setting take center stage before my players, I'm going to use the Stormlight Archive as my example. The Stormlight Archive, because it is going to be a role playing game in the near future. The world itself is a world of storms. There's a storm that sweeps around the world every so many days, and it's part of it's part of the world itself. However, also part of the world and this setting is the type of magic that exists because of this storm. It refreshes anything that is powered by storm light. So I will, if I'm running over the multiple days of journey or whatever the case might be in the game world, I'm going to roll a timer. That timer is for the storm because the storm is ever advancing. There is no stopping it. There is no slowing it. Unless Sanderson does something super weird in his next book that stops storms altogether, which I don't know because I'm not a beta reader. But if the storm stops for whatever reason, that means Stormlight also stops with it, and that's part of the setting of the world itself. However, there is ways of getting that power in the world or in the setting that are beyond just that storm. But regardless of how the power works or where the power comes from, the players should have access to that because that's part of it's ingrained in part of the setting. Um, and I, as the game master, set the limitation on when that power becomes available. So for me, timer dice for the storm. If they have somebody who can bring the storm or the three realms together as part of the lore of the setting, they and then power things with stormlight or the realmic power, then that can also restore the magic. So there are ways that players can use the setting to their advantage, and there's also ways when the setting takes center stage and goes, "You can't do this because the power has faded from you. You don't have the power, and you have to wait for the power to refresh." Just like in the Saturday game that I'm part of, we were from a world not too unlike our own, and we traveled to a new world in the game that was completely different than what we thought we were going to be playing in. Absolutely different. And I'm not complaining about it. It's just it's one of those things like, okay, now I've got a new world to explore, but everything here is different. How things work is different. The power dynamics, the what can happen here is completely different. Food is different. And a lot of that, yes, it's world, but some of it's also setting. Like the power, I should be getting power from the god that I pray to as a paladin, but that god is unreachable. So far as I know, it's unreachable. So then where does the power come from? The power comes from somewhere because I'm still getting the power as a paladin from somewhere. Now it could be that the god is reaching across realms, space, time, whatever, to give me the power. Or it could be that because the setting allows me as a paladin to draw power from somewhere, I'm allowed to continue to do so. And we're reminded constantly that there are things that are inedible. There are things that are inaccessible because we don't have everything that we normally would in a world that's more for our race. Our races aren't native to this world, aren't native to this area. So everything there, as Russ here points out, everything there is poisonous and or magic dissolving. Like it literally the world eats magic away. That's built into the world, into the setting, which we didn't think was possible. Like we didn't realize that there was a natural material, a natural plant that dissolves magic upon contact. Not part of the rule set that we're used to. Like we thought we were playing just D&D 3.5. No, it is D&D 3.5. However, it's, as Scott here says, it's D&D 3.5 meets Australia, where everything there is trying to kill you. Love you, Australia. I've been to your country, and I do love it there. But the top 10 deadliest everything live there, and that's what it kind of feels like in this game world, in this setting, is the top 10 deadliest everything are trying to kill the player characters at all turns. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, keeps us on our toes. But that's where the setting takes center stage. And you're right, Barovia, Ravenloft takes center stage constantly if you're in Ravenloft. And like it yeah, there are things with Ravenloft that I just bad memories. I tried playing a paladin in Ravenloft once. Only once. Never again. And the reason why was because, again, the setting took center stage over the paladin. I didn't have access to everything. I was constantly running up against my limits as a paladin in the setting. But that's the way the setting was made. That's the way the setting was built. Was to make paladins not necessarily useless, but damned hard to play. And they are damned hard to play. Or at least that was my experience. Sci-fi setting where major details stay very important as long as time is the expanse. Okay.
I vaguely recall someone telling me once that playing a paladin in Barovia, you'd be better off just being a fighter.
Yes. Yeah. Because otherwise you might become a fighter without feats very quickly.
Actually, I kind of disagree. I think it's a good taste of what would happen if you lost your power, if you fell from paladinhood. I mean, let's face it, paladins are the most challenging character type to ever play, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're not up for the challenge, then you're not
I
up
was
for
up to the challenge, but Ravenloft just made it harder.
Well, yeah, it made it harder on everybody, though. Let's face it, clerics, druids, unless you're playing a thief, an assassin, or just an out and out scoundrel, evil type of character, it was meant to be that. You were meant to hate Ravenloft and want to get out, not embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
So a paladin losing his powers is the most motivated person you're ever going to find to get the hell out of Ravenloft. That's a guy I want in my party, and that's a guy I want to see succeed and resist all of the corruption and the evil that's there, coming out, making it through there with his head still held high, knowing that he did damn near the impossible. And just like were a paladin to lose his ability and then go back and do all the things it would take to be reinstated. I want to see that story. I want to watch that kind of a character.
That's a very hard road. Very hard road. Having done it once, that was something I don't wish to repeat. That's why I am always minding my P's and Q's as paladins. Even in the Saturday game where I'm playing a paladin, it's like, I have come close to becoming a fighter without feats multiple times, and that's what the rules allow for to happen. It is the paladins can lose their paladin abilities, and the setting that we're in is very, very trying at times as a paladin. Like, I have to make some really hard choices at times to, be the best I can be as a being, a good being, or allow a little bit of rage to take over, a little bit of righteousness in to take center stage on me as a player and character. And sometimes that line is very fine and easy to cross. And I think I've come close to crossing it a couple times with the character. So good on the game master for putting me in those situations. The game master is, of course, Scott. Having more challenges, yeah. So getting back to the setting, taking center stage. And in your own opinion, is it more effective for the setting to be a passive backdrop or an actual active force that shapes the narrative? Mara, I'm going to start with you on this one. So, let's see here. How do I want to word this? Actually, no, I'm just going to leave it at that. Is it more effective for the setting, let's say, TNG, to be a passive backdrop, or is it better for it to take center stage and be an active force that shapes the narrative for you?
Well, you always start players by throwing them into a scenario. The world, the setting, all of that stuff is part of the scenario. Like, for example, the Ornaran episode of TNG. The Ornarans are a sentient race that has been having trade with another world for over a century. but this trade has been recently grinding to a halt. And part of what the crew of the Enterprise needs to do is figure out why that is and decide what they want to do about it. What the actual This is actually one of those episodes of the Next Generation where writing this as a TTRPG module and having people play it would actually be something I think would be incredibly entertaining, because of the fact that the episode has a whole bunch of things where you could do A or B. Because me talking to other people who have watched the episode about it, a lot of people have very, very different things to say about what the choice made at the end of the episode was. Like, oh, well, this is what I would have done, or this is what I would have done. And very, very few people have actually said that they would have done exactly the same thing that was actually the choice made at the end of the episode. And that's the sort of thing that I think would be fun to in a TTRPG, because yes, it's a moral quandary, but it's a moral quandary that has like multiple layers of you making decisions and finding information before you get to the final decision.
Okay. What about you, Shadow? For your setting, is it okay for your setting to be just the passive backdrop, the window dressing, or does it play an active force in shaping events that happen in your game?
Uh, like I said before, I really think it's a balancing act. You don't want it
Okay.
to overpower. It's not Ravenloft. It's not Dark Sun, which were oppressive. You never find, or you rarely find a setting that is just peaches and cream everywhere you go. Okay, if that was the situation, the players would just retire at first level. Okay, but you don't want it to just constantly be hammered into them unless you're playing some sort of a survival game, or that is the main challenge, where the world is a bigger threat than the creatures therein. You want to, like I said, balance it so that the players get their chance to shine, and they're not trying to outshine an entire planet that's out to kill them, which leads to inevitably they die the end, because the planet is way bigger and stronger and more powerful than they're ever going to be. You want them to triumph over all kinds of adversity, but triumphing over the same exact adversity over and over and over again, like Dark Sun, where water is everything, and without it, the game is over. You can't impose such drastic environmental issues for very long without them wanting to leave. And there goes your time spent, your money spent on buying this box set, and then the players hating it so much that you never use it again. You have to give it to them in dribs and drabs, and build up the tension of the hostile environment from time to time. If it's a constant, never-ending situation, they're going to find the one and only port in the storm and stay there and never leave and never adventure, because they get just burnt out on constantly being thirsty, constantly having to look over their shoulders. If it's nothing but that, and there are no peaks and valleys of good times and bad times, what's the point? Life's hard enough as it is. You've got to have those good times to look forward to and to look back on, or you're no better off than just finding another hobby, because at least there you'll find some enjoyment, some reward for all of your time spent. You have to have contrast. If the world is just constantly just beating you down, I don't know too many people who could put up with that for an extended period of time. If not, the entire campaign is going to be all about suffering. Who's in? Raise your hands. Who wants to sign up for that? Only the guy Bill Murray played from Little Shop of Horrors is going to be up for that. And I don't really want to hang out with those kind of people. I want to watch my players smile from time to time, and not because of some horrible, grim, fumble or critical role. I want them to be able to go to a place and go, now this is a place I could retire to. Maybe when we're done with the adventure, I'm going to come back to this place, and this is where I'm going to retire. You have to have places like that 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 are hospitable, that are friendly, that are enjoyable. Otherwise, they'll just keep searching and searching, literally for that. And if there's no that there, what's the point? It's going to be a miserable existence, and eventually you have the players turning on themselves. I find
Mhm.
because there's literally no other chance uh, for peace and prosperity and advancement, because everything is out to get you. Well, you know that just gets old.
Well, this reminds me of a commentary about a movie that I was discussing a while back, where a core aspect of the movie is a mystery box. But at the end of the movie, the people watching the movie go away not knowing what the mystery box was, which I personally feel was the greatest failing of the movie. And, putting that into a TTRPG perspective, it's like, giving players a mystery to investigate and then having them never find out anything. That's not
Uh,
something you would want to do writing a TTRPG module. Now, if the
So,
players just like completely fail to figure it out, okay, that's one thing potentially, but you wouldn't write the module to have it naturally end up that way. The players would have to screw things up. I know, Mac Thompson, I'm not talking about Hellraiser. I'm talking about Mystery Box metaphorically, and I'm actually talking. It's one of the Alien movies. I don't remember the exact name of it. The
um,
Alien prequel thing with the uh whoever white guy who created the aliens.
Ridley Scott.
No, not the. I mean, the in universe, like the what are they called? I don't remember. Engineers.
well, um,
Oh,
oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I don't remember because I don't really watch those films. Um, so as far as you know, having the setting be more just window dressing versus a force that kind of helps shape narrative and shape the world. I've done this in my prime in my setting in my world, where eventually magic and technology start to coexist. They don't truly coexist, actually. They fight with one another for many centuries. Technology as it's being developed starts supplanting or replacing magic because not everybody can do magic, but everybody can use technology. And the more technology takes center stage, the more magic fades away from the world. Now, granted, a lot of people would be like, "Well, that's world." Well, not when magic and technology try to be combined. This is where setting takes hold. When the wizards of the Terran Empire start trying to blend magic and technology, they run into a problem where the magic just can't take root with all of the technological pieces that are moving and having to be just right for the technology to work, whereas the magic just works all the time. um and in the setting, at the very least, the reason why magic and technology didn't get along was there are too many individual components that need to be enchanted along the way for the magic to take hold. You need to make technology out of magical items to be able to enchant it further and make it do more magical things. That was one person's observation of it, at the very least. What if I enchanted every single piece of my multi-barreled gun, and then decided to try to enchant it further. I'm like, well, if you took the time, effort, money, and the experience required to do so, over the course of years, you probably would be able to make an epic level weapon, an epically enchanted weapon that is a multi-barreled gun. Like it'd be possible, but damned, you'd be at it for a very long time, and it may not work in the end. Eventually, flash forward to a more science fiction era in my game world, magic either doesn't exist, or when it does exist, technology just straight up stops functioning in its presence. Magic literally overloads the technology to the point where it just stops or ceases to function. Or vice versa. If the area is so technologically advanced, magic is dampened to the point of almost uselessness, if at all. Um, and that's a product of the setting itself. It's not necessarily the world. It's a product of the setting. Now there are, I have in-game lore reasons why it does this, but that was how I wanted the game to play out. I wanted, these techno wizards to, you know, have to struggle to force magic to work in high magic area in high technology areas, whereas the technology would struggle to work in high magic areas. And players had to try to figure out how to walk that fine line between how much technology do we want on ourselves and how much do we want to rely on magic. There has to be some kind of balancing act, and the players did really well in figuring out like where they could go and what they could do with what they had available to them. Um, and that was a product of the setting, and it helped drive or shape the narrative of where they were going and the enemy they faced. The main villain or the main movers in the background were using the dichotomy between magic and technology to their advantage. They would get out and go so far out of town, use magic to do all sorts of crazy things, and then come back into town with these created objects. Or in that case, it was actually I believe it was a drug ring or something that they were doing. They were making a magical drug and bringing it into town, and the players were like gumshoe detectives, and they were trying to figure out like what's going on here. Why? What is this thing that keeps hooking people, and how and causing people to overdose magically in a technological society. Like this doesn't make sense because it shouldn't be possible. Like it just should not exist in our city. What's happening? And it forced them to go outside of the city and figure out that, oh well, magic does kind of work out here in the no man lands. Okay, now what do we do with this information? Um, so that was when the setting itself really, became center and not just backdrop to the players. It really allowed them to like go, tell us more about exactly how this works and why it's doing this. Let's see here. So I think I've gone through a majority of the things I really want to ask my group here. Now I do have a start comments. I think I've already got to that one. I think. And Chimerian. The thing is last week was critical to make the world different and unlike Earth. But if we come back to it, it just fades away. Why put the effort into creating something super unique? My answer to you on this is if you're going to go through the time and effort to create a unique world, and Scott has done this fairly well, it you have to have it take center stage often and in ways the players aren't expecting. I would say that that's how you keep it fresh in your players' minds. Like, for example, in Scott's game, we are constantly, running up against trees that are very unique compared to trees we're used to. Like I cut down a tree recently because my character's also a carpenter. He's a paladin and he's a carpenter. He always says, I'm a carpenter first, a paladin second. I fulfill my holy duties through my carpentry. But he cut down a tree recently and he had to get a new axe blade or had to rehone his axe blade because damn thing was acidic. He didn't know that. So, suddenly I'm now like, well, I can't use steel axes or tools on this thing because it'll chew through my tools. And the whole world is like this. And good on Scott for, making it center stage. So I think that pretty much rounds out our concept and discussion on setting and why it should be important. Does anybody have anything else to add to this?
Well, one thing is that setting defines the nature of gameplay. Okay. Like
Mhm.
for Boot Hill, for example, you're not going to have players start the game with magic powers. Whether they get magic powers at any point in the game is entirely up to the GM. And, maybe they just won't. Because, Boot Hill, it kind of sort of has magic type stuff in it, but it's one of those like super, super low magic settings that while that kind of creepy stuff kind of sort of exists.
Are you thinking Deadlands? Because Boot Hill there's like but one instance. It's a ghost, and it could very well have been a hallucination. I think I would be willing to bet you're thinking Deadlands.
Well, part of what I was thinking of was what other people have told me rather than things I've necessarily actually seen myself.
Okay.
Like the core rules for Boot Hill don't actually talk about magic at all. Like,
yeah, there's virtually none.
But that makes it so that if your character has any like really, really cool, fancy powers, you have to justify it as elaborate tech gadgetry in what is essentially a steampunk setting, which have fun with that.
Yeah, you're talking Deadlands.
Hmm?
Boot Hill
Yeah,
is
that
a
sounds more
strict.
Deadlands.
Boot Hill is a very, very strict Western shoot 'em up system.
Yep.
Yeah, there's no magic, no
That
weird
one
stuff.
I'm vaguely familiar with.
Yeah, it's like the equivalent of like one of the most Earth-based games you'll ever find because there's nothing unusual other than you might have rolled some cool stats, and even
Yeah.
then, after your first bullet, you're dead.
Yeah, I didn't actually play Boot Hill all that much. I'm not entirely sure if I actually played it right, but anyway.
Yeah. Any last comments or thoughts, Shadow?
Just one of the biggest ones I'm always going to say is know your group. Read the table. If they're yawning or reaching for something else while you're, yeah, thank you. If they're completely zoning out as you're describing, the latest geographical feature, just speed through it and get back to them. We're selfish creatures, and in my experience, most of the time, they're just going to zone out most of that stuff unless it is going to hurt them or help them. They're just not going to care that much. I'm super guilty of it myself. I've been in a bunch of games this last couple of years, and that's why I wanted to be here for this is to find ways to actually care about the setting when it just seems to be yet another mirror or shadow of everything else we've ever been through. It really takes a special hand and a special touch to make a setting memorable and enjoyable. Yeah, because we can all make a setting that's hell on earth, so to speak. And not too many people are really looking for that. They want the challenge, but you've got to have those peaks and valleys. You've got to have that contrast between the good and the bad, or it just it just will fizzle out at the end.
Very well said.
Well, that was
Um,
actually something that I briefly considered bringing up earlier, is that what each individual player wants out of a TTRPG might be different. Because there are players who really, really like the whole like picking up a book and reading a lore dump thing. So some players
Read
like
the
that.
room.
Some players would just throw the book in the trash and go do something else.
Read the room, dude. Read the room.
what I'm going
Maybe
to
even
say
have one of them
is,
questionnaires, and put that on there before you start the game. How much info dump lore are you willing to consume to get into this setting in this game? Because if you're spending more time on that than them, they're gonna fade out.
Yeah, it's like as one person put it, like overbuilding a TTRPG means that you have all of this stuff that's probably never going to get used, even if the players buy in, because of the fact that a lot of the time someone who overbuilds a world will build the world in such a way that players can't see all of it, because they are not actually intentionally seeking out all of these things that are in the world. They would have to find them by random chance, and they're not looking. At least not in that direction.
my final thoughts on the importance of setting is, be upfront with your players about what the setting is. I'm gonna, like, for example, if I'm doing a Bronze Age setting, I'm doing a setting of myth and legend. I'm gonna be upfront with them. Yes, you are gonna probably run into the invulnerable lion, the Nemean lion. You might actually run across the ruiner of nations, the Hydra. There are these things that will exist in this time period. There are legends and lore that I'm going to draw from our world, and I'm going to pull it into this world. I'm going to pull all the nightmarish fairy tales into this world. Why? Because it is an age of myth and legend, and the setting is going to be predicated on a lot of those tropes and a lot of those ideas. Be upfront with your players, let them know, give them a heads up, like, hey, here's what this is about, and if this is not what you're looking for as a game, work with me. What would I have to provide to you to have you in the seat? If you want to change too much, well, I'm sorry, that's not the game I want to run, and you part ways. So let your players know ahead of time. Have that conversation. So with that, I think we have finished on the importance of setting, and I do appreciate everyone in chat. Thank you for hanging out with us this evening. You guys have been very active. I really appreciate that. Um, you know, without you guys, we would just be, three game masters talking into a void, and with no other interaction. I think it would be a very dry and boring show.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for taking your time and participating with us. I really appreciate it.
Happy trails, folks.
Yep. With that, if you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing to this channel and the channels linked in the video description below. If you like tonight's content, please, hit that like button. It lets us know that we're doing a good job and we're giving you things to think about. If you don't like tonight's content, don't be bashful. Hit that dislike button. That's why it's there. It still gives us valuable information. If you haven't already done so, please consider joining our Discord, where you can pose questions like tonight's topic to us on our suggestion forum. There's a lot of other great game masters in our Discord already, and they would love to discuss a lot of these ideas and ruminate on some of these topics. Without further ado, I bid you all a very good night, and we'll see you next time.